Am I talking or are you talking?
Well, it was still running through the whole thing, but we're live now.
Oh, okay.
So this is Matt Finch, and I've got Greg Vaughan here as well. We're going to be talking about the Lost Lands campaign, and we're sort of planning on doing two back-to-back videos. This one being the first one, I think we'll kind of talk more about the story of the Lost Lands in terms of how it's being produced and what all has gone into it and so on and so forth like that. And then in the next one, Greg will talk about the campaign itself, and then we talk about, the Hyperboreans came across to such and such a place at such and such a time, and just cover stuff that's about the actual campaign. Does that work for you?
That works for me.
All right. So right now, what we're doing is we are talking about the sort of institutional origins of the Lost Lands campaign, which I think most people know that the germ and the center of the campaign sort of started with Bill Webb's campaign, home campaign, where he had Rappahannock and various other locations like that. And then the story begins to pick up as fans of Necromancer games are asking how all the various modules fit in. Where are they relative to the other things? And that's where we get to Greg's role, and in terms of creating the overarching structure of the Lost Lands. And so take it away, Greg. I mean, how'd that start?
It really started with Slumbering Czar, actually, when I pitched that adventure idea to Necromancer Games in like 2004 or so, 2005. The idea was to connect Rappahannock with Bard's Gate and the Tomb of Abyssthor, what's now Stoneheart Valley, with Frog God Games, based on the background that was included in the original Rappahannock. And so when I wrote Slumbering Czar, it was sort of as a tying piece, and of course it didn't get published until Frog God Games came into existence. And then shortly thereafter, when we realized Frog God Games was going to be a thing, in fact, just very shortly before you came on board, Matt, Bill calls me. He says, you're going to have to make a campaign setting now out of all of this stuff, which was funny because Necromancer Games had such a catalog, 60 adventures or something out already. And their watchword had always been, these are just plug and play. You can drop them anywhere in your campaign where you want. So there was very little effort made to have them concordant with each other.
Well, there was no effort made. I mean, the idea was that they were all completely standalone.
I mean, some of them would use similar themes, the Bard's Gates, the Rappahannock. They would use similar place names. The Grand Duchy of Rheims, for instance, pops up again and again, but nobody was really checking it to make sure it was consistent. So that was where I began, was with the catalog, the large catalog of Necromancer Games books, and the at the time pretty small catalog of Frog God Games books, and trying to create a cohesive whole out of it. All of which, because we knew Sword of Air was coming and we knew Rappahannock was from Bill's home campaign and all that, so all of it sort of centered around his college campaign from the late 80s, I guess, or mid 80s. I don't know when he went to college, now that I think about it. And so that was the term for
most of that area in terms of what we've got published right now, that is the most of the Gulf of Akados map, but especially the southern portion of the Gulf of Akados map, and then a little bit in the northwest of the Sinar Coast region map, because that's actually where Rappahannock is located on the Sinar Coast region map. And then if there's anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about with those region maps, you can get them from Frog God Games. They're poster maps that show.
Some are on the wall right behind you right now. I see the Gulf of Akados.
That's Gulf of Akados. One of the things, by the way, many people watching this will discover that Greg pronounces all kinds of things incorrectly places in the campaign. It's a discussion we've had many a time, and even a lot of the places that he has dreamed up and written down, he still says incorrectly. So,
Matt has come up with the correct pronunciation. I can just never remember it. Sorry. But
But
yes,
I maintain that, I'm right and you're wrong in all of
okay.
those circumstances.
I'm fine with that. I just continue to be wrong apparently because I can't remember to switch.
There you go. And so anyway, I interrupted. Go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, the interesting thing about Bill's home campaign was like many home campaigns, it's, pieces of everything. So some of the features in his included things like the Misty Mountains and, of course, Crystal Lake, which appeared over and over. And that's his favorite lake name. Crystal Lake and Black Forest are his favorite names and appeared in all of his different campaigns. Didn't necessarily have to be in the same place or the same thing. But then a lot of stuff that was basically lifted out of Tolkien or whatever, which is great for a home campaign, but you can't really use in a publishable campaign. So that was sort of the transformation that became the Gulf of Akados. That's how you say it, right? Akados?
I say Akados.
Akados, right. Okay. I was trying to correct myself.
That's not one of your ones. I mean, Farjati, which is spelled with 2 A's, is got to be Jati. It can't be Farjatai.
It's totally Farjatai. In my head, when I write it, it's Farjatai.
All right, well that works.
But I understand it's Jati in the naming convention things. But anyway, I just have my own little underground pronunciation, I suppose. So even from his original campaign, there was a lot of switching around. And it's funny because you can find little artifacts of that in some of the things, like in the text of, I believe it's Sword of Air, it mentions the Amazon village, which there was always an Amazon village in his campaign, lying several miles to the east of Rapanothuk.
In the water.
In his original, pardon?
In the water.
Yeah, right. Yeah, in his original campaign, the map of Rapanothuk was reversed. The water was to the west, and the dungeon was to the east. But when it was published, it was the water to the east and the dungeon to the west. And so we had already published Rapanothuk with a specific orientation, and so the Amazon village being miles to the east put it in the ocean.
Right.
And one of our fans wrote I don't remember if it was a lost lore or something. Anyhow, it's a little island of Amazon, so it fixes it. So when you go through and look at the Lost Lands, there's a lot of fixes.
Right. We can fix this. We've got an idea.
We can fix this. There's very little things. As I combed through all the Necromancer products and the ever-growing catalog of Frog God products, there have been very few things that I haven't been able to make work.
Now, along those lines, you've got the way that we're developing the Lost Lands now, and it's sort of being developed in 2 directions. One of them is toward a campaign book that you're working on, and the other one is the successive production of region maps and ongoing adventures and so on and so forth. And those are moving kind of in parallel. Now, the way that you've handled a lot of this stuff was to you've already put together a map of the Lost Lands.
Yes. I've got a large hand-drawn double poster map of that.
I don't suppose you have it where you can reach it and show people, do you?
I do. Hold on just a second.
I had to cut mine up into tiny little pieces.
Right.
Because we were sending it over to our cartographer who's in Austria. And the only way that I could do it electronically was to scan it piecemeal. And so there, my map, Greg's getting his out, but this is my map of the Lost Lands. So
yes, I made photocopies of mine 3 or 4 years ago for North Texas and gave it to all the principals of Frog God so they could kind of see the way it looks. So it's a 2 vertical poster map. This is the eastern side, and you probably can't really make out anything on this, but this is mostly ocean. What we've got here is the very eastern seaboard of the continent of Akados or Akados. The Gulf of Akados would be right up in here. And then here's a land bridge that actually connects it to the western or the eastern continent of Libanos. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, you're good so far.
Okay, good. And that's where the iconic places like Kemet and stuff from Necromancer's games, Necropolis was and stuff. So even though this is not part of the continent that is going to be featured in the campaign setting, we're still giving you a little taste of it because that's going to be something that's expanded on in our Ancient Kingdoms line, which I'm sure we will be talking about as well. But
Yeah,
like
a
up
little bit.
here,
I mean, we're sort of thinking more about the history of the Lost Lands here. The Ancient Kingdoms project is just getting the more swords and sorcery, a little bit close to sword and sandal kind of stuff that's over there in
right.
Livingless. But
So, like for instance, here's the Northlands. If you've got our Northlands book and it's got that poster map, this is where it fits on the greater map. And then the second half of the map, which is mostly land, it's the rest of the continent of Ikados, though it does have a large inland sea called the Crescent Sea. Again, I don't know how well you can see, but this is all pretty much land, and then this is a big crescent sea. So on the other map, Rapanathuk and like Baracus and Bard's Gate were all roughly like right here. So this would be Castorage, or the Blight from our most recent. The scale on this map is 1 inch is 200 miles. So it's just a little south of due east across the continent. And
why don't you point out Bard's Gate? Bard's Gate is on that map, isn't it? Why don't you point to that?
Yeah, actually it is. That's right. Bard's Gate's right here. Here's the coastline of the Gulf, and it goes down like that. And then so Rapanathuk is like right there, and Baracus is right there as well. So there's Bard's Gate. Here's the Grand Duchy of Rheims. Here's the city of Rheims, which was a major feature of many of the early Necromancer products, but never actually appeared in them. It was just mentioned in them. So it's a big port on this giant crescent sea. It and the Blight kind of dominate the crescent sea as far as naval traffic goes.
Now
But
for the and then since we're talking about more the production side, we've shown off the map. We're not going to talk yet too much about the different cultures and things. We'll probably get to that in the next video that we do, probably starting right after this one. But I think one of the sort of hilariously funny things that's gone on with this is that, you know, when Bill originally said, okay, you're going to have to make a campaign about this, and then nobody paid the slightest bit of attention to anything having to do with it for the next 2 years.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is true. So while I'm working very hard to make everything from Necromancer games fit into a greater whole, Frog God Games keeps putting out stuff that doesn't necessarily fit. So it's a constant process of adjustment. And it got to where I tried to review all of our products before they went out the door, and most of them I have, and so I've been able to make them work together just with little, like all the Quests of Dooms. I would add a paragraph to the beginning of every adventure of where it would sit if you were wanting to use it in this, so that it would stay consistent and fit. But
because I mean, we still do have the overall idea that we're kind of expecting people to use these as standalone adventures in their own home campaigns, but obviously for some people who follow the Lost Lands, they definitely want to know where it is that these things show up. And
right.
Sometimes they are written with a particular area of the map in mind. That's generally more when things are coming from me and Greg, or somebody who's looked for ideas about where to put something in context. I know a lot of them are written without reference to it, and then Greg finds a place for it, and if there is no place for it, it's going to become an island in the Sinar Ocean next to the Amazon village.
Right.
We're just going to have a giant archipelago of things that didn't fit anywhere else. I think that ought to be the plan.
The archipelago of misfit adventures is what we'll call it.
Yeah.
They just wouldn't fit anywhere. So I think the big selling point, to me anyway, as sort of a gamer completionist type, is every single product that Frog God Games or Necromancer Games has published is on this map, this continental map, with very few exceptions. Like for instance, Necromancer early on did some Judges Guild stuff, which they don't own the rights to. So there's none of the Judges Guild Wilderlands locations on here. City State of the Invincible Overlord is not on this map, for instance. Also, like Rob Kuntz did the first 3 adventures of his Maze of Zayn series through Necromancer. and then he did the fourth one through another publisher who's may have been Four Winds. I don't remember exactly. But anyhow, Necromancer did not own the rights to those, so those are not featured on here explicitly. Though, if you read between the lines, you can kind of see that the stories for them are a part of it if you want them to be. We didn't steal any intellectual property, but we made it so that it could be a fit if you wanted to use those here. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, early on, Necromancer had a big collaboration with Gary Gygax on his Necropolis adventure, which was updated from his Dangerous Journeys game. Was it Dangerous Journeys or Dangerous Adventures that he wrote the original Necropolis for? I can't remember.
Dangerous Journeys.
Dangerous Journeys. And so it was updated to 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons under the OGL, and was released by Necromancer Games. And while we don't own obviously we don't own Gary's IP on it, most of that stuff is taken from actual world history. It's an Egypt analog. So it is here also. We've filed off a few things here and there, but if you're running your old Necromancer Games Necropolis, it still fits in the world. There may be a few name adjustments here and there, just minor.
Well, actually, we do own the manuscript for Necropolis, and there are vaporware plans, vaporware at this point, to go ahead and publish that one, because we do actually own that particular manuscript. But what Greg's talking about in terms of filing off the names in Kemet is that Gary, although he was changing some names, he was really focusing, and Gary loved history, and what he's got there is he's got very much a historical, this is Egypt approach when he did that. And we want to have, we don't want to have areas in the Lost Lands that are direct analogs to Earth, and so we are going to make some changes to the basic concept of the country of Kemet. And in fact, it wasn't. He didn't call it Kemet. It was Egypt with an A at the front, I think, in the original.
Yeah, and it got changed to Kemet for the Necromancer Games one.
Yeah.
So yeah, but basically with those exceptions, every single Frog God and Necromancer product, I can't think of any that aren't. And people were always, because we've got some very different kinds of things, like Razor Coast, which is it's a swashbuckler piratey thing set in a tropical climate, and we've just released the Blight, which is an almost Victorian. It's not really steampunk. I like to call it like Gollum punk, because it's got a sort of industrial revolution feel to it, but it's not mechanical. It's magical. It's a lot of animated corpses doing labor and things like that. It's just a very different feel. And yet, part of the goal of that was to make our world big enough and diverse enough that they all fit seamlessly together. And I think we've been successful, realizing that most people haven't seen much of the big picture because it's taken a while to get out what we've gotten out. But when the campaign setting comes out, I think it'll be a lot easier to see that it all works and it all makes sense. Why is this there and why is that there? It all has a reason. I've also been writing an extensive timeline and world history for it as a result, to try to make everything work. And so if you're into the super deep weeds about that stuff, you're gonna like the campaign.
And we'll probably get a little bit into the super deep weeds in the next video. So now in terms of the way that we are doing all of this stuff, the production timeline with a Frog God Games project almost always starts with a writer coming up with an idea, maybe internally one of our own writers, or it might be a freelancer coming to us, and so we work from there to the editing to the art. And then when we are sort of in the same phase as doing the conversions to make it work in the 3 different systems we publish in, somebody sends a copy over to Greg and says, okay, here it is, let's canon check this. And then what comes back is usually a few name changes, and then it's got the paragraph in the front describing where it's located, and then also it sort of generally goes into your notes. What do your notes look like, Greg, in terms of what the Lost Lands is? Maybe exposing a level of disorganization that you don't
Oh boy. Well, okay, so the folder that I just pulled those maps out of contains a lot of them in the form of maps and stuff that have been jotted down or photocopied out of other books to get scale and stuff, and just random things typed up. Also, sorry, I've got the compilation of stuff out of all the Necromancer games, adventures and stuff, where I've just been compiling.
What are those? Are those like names with where they show up, or what?
Okay, so let's see here. First tab is, sorry, it says magic. This is magic items and spells. So new magic items and spells, which doesn't go into the canon as importantly, except a lot of them are specific to an adventure, to a character in an adventure, that sort of thing. So I've been compiling them here. Like, you know, some of these are artifacts, the arm of Grom and the heart of Grom. Well, Grom is a deity, so we got to make sure we're doing that. So the next tab is monsters. This is just keeping track of all the new monsters that we have put out in adventures, not like in the Tomes of Horrors. Then I've got crunch. So this is different rule subsets that we've created, whether it be navigation skills, new PC races like the Coalige or the Coralite, different kinds of minerals and things. Nolium and onium are two types of metals found in Hawkmoon. New feats. This is all from a 3.5 standpoint, because that's, of course, what Necromancer Games was. New weapons, new diseases, just so that there's a consistency. Here's a new race that has appeared, the Street Dwarf. That was originally in the Hawkmoon title, Elemental Moon by Lance Havermail. Well, Street Dwarfs appeared and play a very big role in the Blight. They're a major race, at least in the Pathfinder version. I don't remember how they translated across the conversions to 5e and Swords and Wizardry.
Yeah, we kept Street Dwarves in for 5th edition. Skeeter ran through the Swords and Wizardry side on that one, but they're okay in there for 5th edition, but okay, they're a little less prevalent, I would say, because there were a lot of situations where something got dialed back to a regular dwarf just for simplicity, but they're in there, yeah.
And that, yeah, so that's fine. And so it's just these things, a lot of really creative people wrote the Necromancer Games books and came up with a lot of stuff. And so you've got this really cool concept for a disease or a weapon or a god or whatever that appeared in one place and then never gets used again. So I wanted to make it so that they sort of exist across the boards and they're not, you know, just located in that one place, unless it made sense to. Here's flora. If it mentions a specific type of plant, I wanted to say, oh, we know that type of plant grows in this location and this sort of environment, and it helps me place adventures and stuff. Racial traits, including like naming conventions, which you got into a lot in Borderland provinces, sort of totally independently of this. But this is something that has appeared in Necromancer Games and Frog God Games books, where certain areas seem to have certain names, so I've been trying to compile them. And then deities. I started out on these sheets, and then I quit and went to a spreadsheet, which is like almost 300 deities that have been introduced.
Oh, speaking of 300 deities, Athena, have we got Athena in there anywhere? Because I noticed that Belon the Wise is almost like a male version of Athena. He's got the owl, he's, you know, wisdom god, and
we don't have the direct Greek pantheon. Some of it appears in a more Romanesque type of thing, like Diana is the main goddess of the Amazons. Belon the Wise is probably a good analog for Athena, and actually Zeus does appear in one of the early which book was it in? One of the early anthology books of Necromancer Games, either Raise the Dead or, oh, it's the Book of Taverns. He runs an interplanar bar.
Excellent.
And he's called Zeus Golden, but he's Zeus. And this is neat because there's all this concordance that occurs because the Lost Lands exists in the material universe, which is also, we wanted it to be, you can use any campaign from any company. It's the same universe. You just have to go far enough. That includes Earth. And because we have initially the company that we worked with the most with Lost Lands and stuff, or as Frog God, was Paizo with their Pathfinder role or Pathfinder game. So I kind of got on board with their timeline, and their world of Golarion exists in the same universe with Earth, and its timeline is approximately the current timeline in Golarion would be like Earth in the 1920s. They had an adventure where you could actually get involved in some parts of World War I. And so ours is on the same timeline. So Earth exists. It's far away. You wouldn't really encounter it, but it is also in early 20th century Earth would be concurrent with what we've got going on. So that means it's long past the prime of the Greek pantheons and stuff, which perfectly fits with the character of Zeus Golden as the former head of a pantheon of ancient days, who's kind of been reduced in status to this. And this is some Necromancer Games book that came out in probably like 2003. And it just totally fits perfectly with our timeline and our cosmological concept.
So let me go ahead, and I think we've sort of covered now the some of the background production stuff and a little bit of the history of the Lost Lands as it was developed and as how it's still being developed. What I'm going to do is I think we'll end this one here, and then very shortly get on and do a second one where we talk about the Lost Lands as a campaign from the inside. So I'm going to go ahead, and I'm going to stop us broadcasting. Everybody, I hope you enjoyed it. Take it and imagine the hell out of it.
There you go.